Dear daughter, I'm writing this as a warning. His silence can be a form of manipulation. And if that ever happens to you, I want you to be prepared. Once, I was in a conversation that seemed simple. He looked into my eyes and smiled. We went to a cafe, talked about life, everyday things. It felt comforting, until suddenly, he stopped responding. A deep silence hung between us. It was as if the atmosphere had shifted, and a weight settled in the air. I asked if everything was okay, but he just looked away. That pause in the conversation, which should have been normal, made me feel that something was wrong. Restlessness took over me. What had I said? What had upset him? The emptiness of his response started to echo inside me. It was at that moment I realized that silence wasn't just a lack of words. It was a disguised warning. And it wasn't love. It was control. When someone does this, when they turn silence into a weapon, it's an attempt to shape your reaction. And it's easy to fall into this trap. The sign to watch for is your own breathing. If you feel like you need to justify your desires to fill that void, that's the time to be alert. Silence isn't always respect. Sometimes it's a strategy. Most of the time, it means your needs are being ignored, that your no isn't being accepted. This is a sign that you are not in a safe place. And here's the simple rule I want you to remember. If he withdraws and you feel anxious, that isn't love. Love shouldn't be a test of resilience. Love should be a calm space, where no is met with understanding, not distance. If one day you find yourself in this situation, remember, you have the right to be heard. You have the right to say no. And if this triggers more silence, take a pause. Breathe. Listen to what he doesn't say and observe who he really is. If you allow yourself to respect your boundaries, you will find a clearer path. If he's not willing to stick around when you say no, then the real ghost isn't him. It's the fear you feel regarding your own voice. If you remember one thing, remember this. You deserve a love that doesn't make you feel small. When the silence settled in, I didn't know I was about to enter an emotional labyrinth. The feeling of being alone in the room, even with him beside me, was like being lost in a dense forest. The echo of my thoughts became deafening, and his lack of response seemed to shatter every piece of confidence I had in us. I remember looking out the cafe window, watching people pass by. Some were laughing, others were arguing. Life continued outside, while I sank deeper into my own uncertainty. The aroma of fresh coffee mixed with the bitter taste of despair. And there, with every passing second, a part of me began to question. What did I do wrong? That's when I realized something important. He wasn't just silent. He was using silence as a way to shape my behavior. The way he averted his gaze, as if surrounding the conversation with a fog of indecision, forced me to see that his presence was more tied to expectation than to affection. I found myself succumbing to the urge to fix the situation. I wanted to fill that empty space, as if my words were a remedy for the discomfort lingering between us. "Are you okay?" I asked, more than once, like an anxious mantra. But the answer was still absent. It was as if I were trying to bring back a response from an echo that never existed. The smile that had once illuminated his face was now just a mere fragment, a ghost of something that seemed genuine. I felt my heart racing, my body reacting to the dissonance of my soul. The truth began to surface, as if emerging from the shadows. He enjoyed that power. It could be subtle, but the manipulation was cloaked in the softness of a lost gaze. The silence created a dark space where I needed to dance, leaving me feeling vulnerable. More than that, I was blind to what it really meant. It wasn't about me. It was about him. I knew I needed more clarity, but how could I achieve that when communication had turned into a game? The uncertainty became a current pulling me down. I started thinking about the women around me, all with their stories of love and pain. How many of them had faced this oppressive silence? How many had accepted this veiled manipulation as normal? Then my gaze fixed on him again. An act of courage arose within me. Instead of losing myself in my need for him, I decided to find myself. I took a deep breath. The fresh air and the breeze coming through the door reminded me that there was a life beyond that table, a life where I didn't need to justify my existence. In that moment, I made a choice. I looked directly into his eyes and said, "I feel like you're not listening, and that's painful." The sincerity of my voice was a beacon, cutting through the fog of silence. There was no immediate response, but something changed. The weight in the atmosphere seemed to lift, and the tension began to dissipate. He looked at me, and in that instant, I realized he was waiting to see how I would respond. The silence was no longer a weapon. It was a test, and I was determined to pass. The strength grew within me, challenging the anxiety that had previously dominated. I wasn't there to beg for attention or affection. I was there to be heard. If he didn't acknowledge the pain he was causing, then I would know he wasn't the right man for my life. True love shouldn't require sacrifices. It shouldn't turn my emotions into a bargaining chip. With every beat of my heart, the certainty that I deserved more grew stronger. I deserved to be respected, to be heard, and above all, to be loved unconditionally. After that conversation, it wasn't easy. Silence crept back in a few times, but now I had the tools to deal with it. I learned to observe. I learned to listen to what he wasn't saying, to interpret the signs. The cycle of fear no longer defined my reality. And when silence threatened to engulf me again, I reminded myself of that little powerful phrase, "I have the right to say no," a mantra that echoed in my mind, bringing forth the truth that I had struggled to hear for so long. I built a new narrative of love that included healthy boundaries and mutual respect. Love shouldn't be a transaction. It should be a haven, and it should never, ever make you feel small. And if you ever find yourself lost on this path, remember this: true love helps you grow. It doesn't dim your light. If you feel the need to hide, reconsider. True love is clear. It is safe. It is a space where your no is as welcome as your yes. It is an invitation to freedom, not a prison in disguise. If you hold this in your heart, you will always be ready to recognize what you truly deserve. When the silence threatened to settle in again, a new feeling began to blossom within me. It was a desire for freedom that I had never experienced before. What once paralyzed me was now turning into fuel. Instead of retreating, I moved forward. Life was so much more than those frozen moments of doubt. One night, as I looked out the windows of my home, the city lights shone brightly. Each point of light represented a possibility, a choice. I realized that the stories of the women around me were not just about pain. They were also about rebirth. A circle of courage surrounded my being. They faced their shadows and emerged stronger, and I wanted to be one of them. The idea of love I had built needed to be reshaped. It wasn't just about finding someone who loved me, but about loving myself. Self-love isn't just a concept. It's a daily practice. In moments of doubt, I remember to look within and see the woman I am, not the woman he wanted me to be. One day, I attended an event with friends. We were dancing, laughing, and celebrating life. Then, when I least expected it, an acquaintance approached and made an innocent comment. "You look so happy. Are you in love?" His smile was genuine, but the echo of the question felt like a reminder. I was on the right path, transforming pain into joy. "Yes," I replied. "I'm in love with who I'm becoming." The words came out like a breath of fresh air, an affirmation that my journey depended on no one but me. What I didn't realize in that moment was that my response would resonate beyond that room. Those moments were like a seed planted, germinating into something greater. With every word, I felt myself stepping away from the shadow of control that had once consumed me. It was as if a new chapter was being written, one that I had the power to shape. From that night on, silence was no longer a place of fear for me. Now, it was a space for reflection. When he became quiet again, instead of feeling small, I took a deep breath and observed what it meant. "Why aren't you talking? What does this reflect about us?" These questions became my allies. And in one of those reflections, I realized that anger also had its place. His silence wasn't just manipulation. Sometimes, it reflected his own insecurities. He wasn't the only one fighting his demons. Thus, I learned that I could question, but I could also understand. This balance between confronting and embracing became vital. Once, during a deeper conversation, he admitted to fearing the loss of connection. "I don't want you to stop wanting me," he said, vulnerability clear in his voice. That was a turning point. For the first time, I saw not just a man, but a human being with fears and insecurities. Empathy moved me, but that didn't erase what I had already experienced. Understanding didn't excuse his shortcomings. I began to set clear boundaries. "I need you to listen to me, even when you're scared," I said. Each conversation became a step toward building true love, where both of us were seen and heard. Still, I knew a fragile balance existed. One night, while we were watching a movie, silence returned with intensity. I felt the weight of unspoken words, but instead of succumbing to fear, I decided to confront it. I remembered the women around me, their stories of love and freedom. I stood up, looked him in the eyes, and said firmly, "If you can't hear me now, we need to talk about what that means for us." The tension in the air was palpable, but there I was, strong and determined. Even though love was present, I couldn't allow myself to fade into a dark corner. He stopped, held my hand, and for the first time, I saw recognition in his eyes. A light ignited between us, a willingness to change. In that moment, I understood that being vulnerable wasn't a weakness, but a powerful strength. True love doesn't demand that I shrink, it lifts me up. Our conversations became a dance, where each step was a conscious choice. The silence, once oppressive, began to feel like a safe space for deep expressions of feelings. In those moments of connection, I realized that there were still challenges ahead, but instead of fearing the unknown, I embraced the possibility of growth. True love brought with it a freedom I never knew existed. And even when storms approached, I knew I had found my internal anchor. If you remember anything, remember this. Love should be a refuge, a space where you can thrive. Always communicate with clarity, always listen with empathy, and above all, never let silence dictate your truth. You deserve a love that simply respects you. And when that happens, know that you have finally found the home you have always sought. Even when storms approached, I knew I had found my internal anchor. With each challenge, a new layer of me emerged, like a flower blooming after a harsh winter. Love was no longer a minefield, it was a garden. One night, while walking with friends, listening to laughter and conversations, the memory of that cafe came back to me. The discomfort of silence transformed into gratitude. Gratitude for the strength I had found within myself. It was then that I realized that beyond the boundaries I had set for others, I also needed to cultivate internal boundaries. I remembered moments when I had ignored my own needs, sacrificing my well-being for a distorted idea of love. Each laugh shared that night reinforced the message. I didn't need his approval or anyone else's. Joy began to bloom from within, almost as if I were rediscovering forgotten parts of myself. I looked at the women around me. Their bright eyes were mirrors of my own journey. One of them suddenly said, "You seem so changed." And in that moment, everything made sense. I was rediscovering myself, free from that oppressive shadow. The connection with those friends was pure, a reminder that true love manifests in many forms. It wasn't just about romantic relationships, but about friendships that uplift and celebrate who we are. Trust resonated in the exchanged words, in the shared vulnerability. With that, something even more powerful ignited within me, the freedom to be authentic. Every step toward that authenticity made me stronger. Love isn't built on obligations, but on choice and mutual respect. And deep down, I realized that loving myself would open doors to genuine and healthy loves that were yet to come.